Ladies and gentlemen, those who are joining us online this afternoon, you are very much welcome, and I would like to just introduce myself briefly. I am Panelist Introductions, Director for Strategic Partnerships Unit in the Human Sciences Research Council, and this afternoon I'll be here to navigate through the seminar or the webinar with you. So just to give you a brief introduction to the webinar this afternoon, it's really around the mental, neurological, and substance use disorders. So the provision of treatment, care, or rehabilitation services for people who are experiencing the mental, neurological, and substance abuse disorders, it is a multi-sectoral responsibility, and certainly the one that touches on various communities in our country. And I think particularly not just in our country, throughout most challenged economies in Africa. The mental, neurological, substance and substance use disorder, which I will refer to as MNS going forward, the disorders are quite common and they are disabling at oftentimes. And they're also associated with increasing premature mortality rates. Traditional healers have also a unique role, have a unique role to play, especially in resource-limited settings, like I mentioned, in our challenged economies in the region. So it is estimated that there are about 200,000 traditional healers as compared to about 975 registered psychiatrists who mostly practice in urban areas and private sector. The traditional healers are highly accessible and acceptable as health practitioners in sub-Saharan countries. Traditional health practitioners and those linked to faith-based organizations play a significant role in providing services for people with MNS disorders. These are often at an entry point into system of care. These providers, therefore, could play a significant role in identifying people with such disorders, and in some cases have cooperatively work cooperatively with health services in providing for the mental health and spiritual needs of individuals. There is a need to understand the role of traditional health practitioners in mental health care. So, ladies and gentlemen, this webinar seeks to understand the role, knowledge, attitudes, and practice of traditional healers in mental health care, with the aim to encourage their participation in terms of the treatment, care, and rehabilitation of people with mental, neurological, and substance use disorders. So, without further ado, colleagues, our webinar this afternoon, we have 4 speakers who are all joining us online. I will first like to just ask the speakers if you could have your videos on so that the online participants could at least see you. And also, in the interest of time, I will introduce all of you right now, just so we can avoid a waste of time, given that majority of us are challenged with our power cuts. So, panelists, could you please have your videos on? Thank you very much. I was on the other screen, I could not see you. So I would like to introduce Dr. Lerato Dikobe-Galani, who is a psychiatrist and a member of South African Society of Psychiatrists. I'm not going to go to detail with the speakers' biographies, but then I'm hoping that you can also have some access into their bios. So Dr. Dikobe-Galani, who is a psychiatrist, is also who obtained her medical degree from Medunsa in 2002, is a psychiatrist. She also has a postgraduate degree, pardon me, colleagues, postgraduate degree in psychiatry training at Vescopis Psychiatric Hospital, and graduated as a specialist psychiatrist from University of Pretoria. And then I will move on to Professor Tolene Sodi, who is a registered clinical psychologist and currently a full professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Limpopo. He does hold a master's degree in clinical psychology from the University of Witwatersrand and a PhD from the University of Cape Town. So Professor also does serve in various councils and boards, including the South African Medical Research Council and the Health Professions Council of South Africa. Then I'll move on to Dr. Thoza Makwebani Oguleya, whose mission really is invested in research, writing, teaching, and leadership in order to ensure that organizations and institutions that are concerned or interested in conducting scientific research do so with rigor and a positive impact in ensuring that the socioeconomic status in our societies can be advanced, or we can understand in depth the socioeconomic developments within our societies. Dr. Kwebani Oguleya research is interest really is to ensure that she can create a platform that is specifically purposed towards rigorously evaluating traditional medicines from scientific point of view. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm not so certain, you will indicate to me when Mr. Lehlohonolo Lepoto does join us. Hopefully he does get connected. At this point in time, he's challenged like majority of us in the country. Without waste of further time, I would like to request that we start with our presentations. Dr. Dukobe Kalani, the floor is yours. Mengak.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll greet everyone in English. Leka Sesotho dumelang kaofela and leka semoya thokozani nonke. So I'm going to try and share my screen. We did practice doing this. Yes, and then I can just start from play slide. Okay, I hope everyone can see my slides properly. Okay, so like Auspalisa has already introduced me, my name is Lerato, and I am a psychiatrist currently based in Western Cape, recently moved down about 6 months ago. I'm originally a Gautenga. This is a topic that is very, very close to my heart, you know, the role of the traditional or faith healer in mental health. Just to start with definition by WHO of what constitutes what constitutes mental health. So by definition, mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully in their occupation, and is able to make a contribution to his or her own community. So prevalence of mental health for over a period of 12 months is a prevalence estimate of about 16.5% of people being diagnosed with a mental disorder, and about 30.3% lifetime prevalence of common mental disorders like depression and anxiety and substance abuse. And there's also a huge treatment gap in our country where only 1 in 4 people with common mental disorders will receive treatment of any kind. Identification and access to treatment for these people with psychotic disorders is actually far better than in those people with common mental disorders like depression and anxiety. And I think this is because somebody who is psychotic causes a lot of disruption in the community. And so care is accessed quicker and maybe not always effectively, but definitely quicker. People with mental health conditions often face stigma in our community, and they're often discriminated against. And this will have a negative impact on their lives, leading to them attempting suicide or even self-harm. So just what are the myths and the truths about mental health? What is a myth is that mental health is something to be ashamed of. That is a myth. Mental health is a sign of weakness. Mental health is all in your mind. It's something that is negative. it's all in your head, it's a taboo, and it's something that you can just snap out of, or mental health is fake news. So all that is a myth. What is mental health? Mental health is real, and it's something that everyone can suffer from, mental illness. It's important for everyone to take care of their mental health. It's something that needs care as much as you care for your body. It's part of us as human beings. Mental health is very complicated. Mental health does fluctuate depending on what's happening with you internally or outside of yourself. And it's something that we need to look after, and it is extremely important. So about our mental health care providers, earlier on, Auspalisa mentioned that we are about 900 odd active psychiatrists in the country. Those are statistics from about 2 or 3 years ago. It has actually dwindled. We're only 649 active psychiatrists, according to the HPCSA. We have lost a lot of our colleagues, with the grand exodus to greener pastures. So they say New Zealand, Australia, the US, UK, and Canada poaching our psychiatrists over the past 10 years. And unfortunately, we have lost quite a few colleagues with this recent pandemic. And of the 649 psychiatrists that are registered and active with HPCSA, only 130 are in the public sector, a public sector that is actually taking care of 75% of the South African population. A majority of these psychiatrists, both in state and in private, are actually located in the urban areas of our country. Very limited access to psychiatric treatment for the general public, and studies have shown that alternative practitioners may then step up and play a very important role in supporting mental health for our people. There are many, many more traditional and faith healers as compared to mental health practitioners in our country. And given our limited public sector mental health providers, traditional and faith healers can and actually should play a very important role in assisting people with mental health issues at a primary healthcare level. And in many African traditional belief systems, some mental health problems are believed to be due to an ancestral calling. Traditional healers and faith advisors are also viewed as having expertise in this area. Also fact, traditional and faith healers are very influential and very respected in their communities. And often a lot of people, before coming to my office or before consulting with any Western practitioner, they have gone to see their traditional or faith healer first. Research has shown that traditional and faith healers can intervene quite positively in patients that suffer from milder mental health issues. For example, a mild depressive episode, grief, or a mild anxiety disorder. There is very, very little evidence showing the impact of treatment for severe mental illness. And when I say severe mental illnesses, I'm talking about conditions like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, where there is very little evidence supporting that traditional and faith healers can be very impactful there. And then in the DSM-5, the DSM-5 is like it's the manual that we use in practice in psychiatry and psychology. They've updated the criteria to reflect cross-cultural variations in presentations rather than having a simple list of what they used to call culture-bound syndromes. And this then gives more detailed and structured information about cultural concepts of distress, and including a clinical interview tool to facilitate comprehensive and person-centered assessment. So we are trying in psychiatry and in Western mental health to destigmatize cultural presentations of certain mental disorders. Different cultures and communities exhibit and explain symptoms in various ways. And because of this, it's important for clinicians to always be aware of relevant contextual information stemming from a patient's culture, race, ethnicity, religion, or geographical origin. And understanding such distinctions can help clinicians more accurately diagnose problems as well as more effectively treat them. I thought I'd share two case presentations of actual patients that I've treated in my practice, actually in the past year and a half. I have changed their names. So we'll start with our first patient, my most recent patient. Her name is Tato, Mrs. M, 33 years of age. She has 2 children, 10 and a 6-year-old. She's an auditor by profession and also runs a side business. She's an entrepreneur. And recently, her husband had been brutally murdered, having been gunned down in their driveway. She then spent a year after the husband's passing protecting her husband's assets from her in-laws. The in-laws then cursed her and told her that she would not live to see another year. So the challenges that she presented with, she was having an irritable mood, anger outbursts, poor work performance. She couldn't sleep at night. She had lots of interest in things that she used to enjoy doing. She became very paranoid and had feelings of low self-worth and thoughts of actually harming herself. She then went and consulted Menzwagi, whom she refers to as her spiritual mother. And after Menzwagi did her assessment, she then diagnosed that the symptoms that she was exhibiting were not as a result of a curse from her ancestors, nor were they a result of witchcraft. Menzwagi then referred her to come and see me for further intervention. I did a psychiatric assessment, and I then diagnosed Tato with a persistent grief disorder with depressed mood. I then hospitalized her for comprehensive in-hospital care for a period of about 2 weeks, discharged her, and she was doing very well. My second patient, I think my favorite by far over the past few years, her name is Ndombi, Miss B, a 28-year-old beautiful young lady with 1 child, unmarried, and working as a personal banker at the time that I saw her. So she presented to me with a history that she had not been sleeping for about 5 days. She believed that she was going through a spiritual awakening and kept looking at me to say, "Doctor, you know what I mean? You know, when I say like a spiritual awakening." And because of the spiritual awakening and the stars all being aligned, she was paranoid that her family was worried that she was going to expose all their deep, dark secrets. She had always struggled with sleep problems from a very young age because she used to have very vivid dreams. She would often feel very overwhelmed in crowded spaces because she would pick up on everybody's negative energy, and she often had deja vu experiences. So when she came into my hospital, I made a diagnosis of her very first episode of a manic disorder, and I hospitalized her. I had to sedate her for about 3 to 4 days with mood stabilizing antipsychotics. That was really just to try and calm down her brain neurons. As a responsible medical practitioner, I had to exclude any physical or organic causes for her presentation. I did a drug screen, did numerous blood tests. We even did a brain MRI and an EEG, and all her blood tests and investigations were normal. By day 10, she was sleeping very well. Her mood had settled down and her thought processes were more logical. She no longer spoke of stars being aligned or of the family being paranoid around her. Day 18, I then discharged her and gave her a script of mood stabilizers that she was going to use for a period of about 6 months. I booked her off work for about 4 weeks. She still at that time felt very strongly to pursue the spiritual calling that she was having. My advice to her at that time was to just wait a few weeks, let the medication work with her, let everything settle down before pursuing the spiritual calling. I then saw her for follow-up on week 6. And then at that time, she came with her family, and the family reported that she was doing well, and she also felt like she was doing well. I discussed it with her family, asked them to please listen to her and give her support with regard to her spiritual calling. Month number 6, Ndombi came in. Her mental state had fully settled. She was happy. She was doing well, both personally and at work. And the feedback she gave me was that following numerous family meetings, she had been finally given the green light to go on a spiritual journey of Hotwasa. So with these 2 case reports, for me, I just thought I needed to share this with everyone that is attending this webinar. There is a need for a greater collaboration between Western mental health practitioners and traditional and faith healers to assist in the provision of hasty and appropriate mental health care. There needs to be a mutual respect and understanding of each other's roles and cultures when coming to treating patients with mental health challenges. And by fostering a working relationship between Western mental health practitioners and traditional or faith healers, treatment-resistant patients can appropriately get cross-referred for alternative treatment. And with appropriate education and information sharing, the traditional and faith healers can then learn how to identify and treat common mental disorders. And then those that are beyond their scope of practice, they would then be able to refer to the Western practitioner. Traditional healers can also be equipped with appropriate referral pathways to more specialized treatment facilities for those with more complex mental illnesses. Same goes with the mental health, with the Western mental health practitioners, who should also be educated on how to appropriately refer those patients in need of traditional and spiritual intervention. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dikobe for such a wonderful presentation. And I'm actually even wondering myself that how often or how open-minded is the formal or the Western environment or the practitioners? How open-minded are they to actually encourage collaboration between the traditional or faith-based healers, you know, as far as these challenges are concerned? That said, so that's a question I will park for us to discuss later, and I'm sure most of those questions will come up with the Q&A session. So that said, I would also like to ask Professor Thole Nesodi, who is going to talk to us about the multiple roles of a traditional healer in a mental health care. I do encourage you colleagues to put your questions or comments in the Q&A platform, but then I will open up for us to have a discussion later on. So without further waste of time, Professor Thole Nesodi, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see the slides because I'm aware that technology is always a challenge, particularly at that moment when one has to present, something just somehow goes wrong. But I believe that everyone can see that. So I was requested to talk about the multiple roles of a traditional healer in mental health care. And I must just say up front that it is quite interesting how what Lerato said is exactly what I'm going to say. I think just so much in common. And in fact, it does even appear that some of the slides we may have somehow sort of shared them before. And so interesting, the striking parallels between what he has presented there and what I will be presenting. But that, I think, just goes to underline the significance of the topic that we are looking at. So I thought I should just outline my presentation in terms of the specific topics or themes that I will cover. As you can see there, that's my name. The institution I am affiliated to is the University of Limpopo. And so in terms of the outline of the presentation, thought I should just give some background. And I think it will be amiss if we just don't refer to COVID and its negative impact and how that plays into the role of the need for involvement of different role players in the treatment of mental disorders. And then I move on to talk about alternative mental health services. And then after that, I look at multiple roles of traditional healers. And Somewhere along the line, I look at some lessons and recommendations. What are the lessons that we can get from this form of healthcare practice? And then, of course, I will draw my conclusions somewhere at the end. So, having given that background, let me just then start here by saying that a systematic review and meta-analysis of studies in 1980 and 2013 established that up to 29.2% of individuals globally experienced common mental disorders at some point in their lifetime. So you can see that these numbers are quite huge. And you can see that's a study by Steele and colleagues there in 2014. It's a fairly old study, and certainly the figures may have dramatically changed recently because of other developments like COVID. South Africa also carries a huge burden of mental disorders, the most prevalent being depression, anxiety disorders, substance abuse disorders, and mood disorders. And that's something that was presented by Matlala and colleagues in their study. Now, whilst that is the picture that we see before COVID, recently we see from global and local studies that COVID-19 has had a very serious impact on mental health of individuals, families, and communities. For instance, a health tracking poll conducted in July 2020, that was just a few months after the onset of COVID. This was done by the Henry Kaiser Family Foundation. They found that 4 in 10 adults in the US reported symptoms of anxiety and depressive disorders. That's a very huge number. So you can imagine if you have 10 people seated somewhere, and we look around, just probably predict that about 4 out of those people have got some kind of show symptoms of anxiety and depressive disorders. Now, interestingly, in South Africa, a recent study by DeMann and others found that more than 45% of participants surveyed for COVID-19 related stressors met the diagnostic threshold of anxiety and depressive disorder. That obviously is a very huge number. And of course, it would be interesting to see post-COVID how these numbers are going to play out. But certainly, as we speak now, one can predict that in the country, there is quite a very high number of people who are possibly struggling with anxiety and depressive disorders, particularly if we look at the high levels of violence in communities, the high levels of suicide, and other types of societal ills that manifest in our communities today. Now, whilst the number of people with common mental disorders in South Africa are evidently high, what we see is that less than 27% of those presenting with these problems ever receive treatment in established mental health care facilities. And I'm sure this is what Lerato has also referred to in her presentation. And of course, what it simply means is that nearly 3/4 or more of those suffering from mental disorders are not accessing mental health care from established mental health care facilities. And this is something that was indicated by the South African College of Applied Psychology way back in 2019. Now, the question that we may ask at this point is, where do these many people who need mental health services go? Then saying only 27% or thereabout will receive mental health treatment. What about the others? And in my view, there are 2 possible responses to this question. The first one is that many of these individuals go untreated in some cases for the rest of their lives. They just continue to linger on with this problem in their lives and nothing happens. Largely because of community and societal contexts that may ultimately be playing a role to make it difficult for people to access services. But Another explanation is that a significant proportion of these individuals may be receiving treatment from traditional healers and other alternative mental health care service providers, such as faith healers. And this is what Lerato has also alluded to earlier on. Now, that being the case, that most probably traditional healers play a role, we see that available evidence also suggests that up to 70% of South Africans will consult traditional healers at some point in their lives. So it means somewhere along the line, as we go on with our lives, with the daily struggles, there is a moment when people may feel, look, let me consult traditional healers. Some may consult more often than others, but 70% is quite a very huge number. And the next question then is, what is it that gets individuals, families, and communities to continue to seek mental health services from traditional healers? Well, one common explanation that has been given, and I know a lot of people have written about this, and earlier on, I think in this platform, I saw Leslie Swart. I know he's written a lot on some of these things as well. And so the holistic approach that traditional healers adopt basically suggests that to some extent, these individuals may be playing a very significant role and therefore being very accessible to the clients they serve when compared to Western trained mental health practitioners. But here is the most interesting point I want to raise. In my language, in Sepedi or in Northern Sotho, depending on which part of the world you come from, because there's a bit of controversy around whether it's a Sepedi or Northern Sotho. A traditional healer is known as a ngaka. In fact, the concept of traditional healer in my language, in my understanding, it's a misnomer because of the multiple roles that a ngaka plays. In other words, when you say a ngaka is a traditional healer, you are actually limiting the scope of what a traditional healer does out there. Because in my understanding, a ngaka is a medical practitioner, is a psychiatrist. They would be able to diagnose, assess, and probably administer some form of treatment to somebody with a mental disorder. Of course, there is a need as well for many studies in this field so that we could be able to discern specifically what kind of conditions would a traditional healer or a ngaka be able to treat when compared to other types of health practitioners. A traditional healer, a ngaka, is a pharmacist. After you have consulted and they would have done what they would have done in terms of diagnosis and assessment, they would dispense some medication or some herbs that would be given to you. And of course, in that sense, then it means there is some role that a traditional healer plays as a pharmacist. What we also see is a ngaka is a general psychologist because it's a clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, it's actually an industrial psychologist, in the sense that when you have issues with your workplace, challenges there, and things are not going well in your workplace, you may consult a traditional healer who will assist you and give you the necessary interventions so that when you get to your workplace, you're then able to succeed. In fact, maybe just to digress a little bit, share with you a little story around One moment when I had a few traditional healers in my part of the world, and we were meeting this group of traditional healers with colleagues from the UK. And so the colleagues from the UK were very curious about how the traditional healers are working and so on. And one of the traditional healers, interestingly, invited one of the professors in the UK and said to her, look, I want to throw the bones and diagnose whatever condition that you may be having. And so he threw the bones and went on with his activities, and somewhere along the line, something that continued to stay with me, and also when I interact with the colleagues, I always raise this, is that he said to this colleague, you're going to get promotion very soon in your workplace. Well, a few months thereafter, this colleague tells me that she has been promoted. So it could be coincidence, but very interesting that somehow this traditional healer delves into these kind of things. As to whether scientifically that is the case or not, we will never know. But just interesting how sometimes these things would probably play a very significant role, because somebody who believes in this kind of practice would certainly psychologically be convinced that this system works, and it therefore consolidates and strengthens their belief, and in terms of their well-being, they probably would be better. So Engaka is also a social worker in the sense that they will also be dealing with issues in the family, and they would ensure that things go well there. Is a spiritual leader, because whenever there are issues out there, the traditional healer would come on board to assist people who have spiritual challenges. He's also an environmentalist and a cultural specialist. So if you look at all these roles, the multiple roles that the traditional healer plays, in my view, what it simply means is we need to understand that our individual respective roles that we play, for instance, as a psychologist, as a psychiatrist, in the case of Lerato there, in the case of somebody who's a social worker and so on. A traditional healer basically goes into all these roles, and ultimately what the client receives is comprehensive, holistic service. Now, what are the lessons that we could learn from this kind of situation, the holistic potential that I've referred to? As Western trained health practitioners, we can learn from this approach. What we can also learn is that mental disorder is not just a physical or psychological ailment. There are cultural, spiritual, family, environmental, and many other dimensions that underlie this kind of conditions. What we also see is that traditional healers that are primary healthcare service providers, they live within their communities, they're accessible, and so it therefore makes it easier for people to consult with them, compared to, for instance, a psychologist who may be somewhere in the big city, a psychiatrist who may be in a big city, and every time when somebody wants to consult, it takes mission for that person to ultimately go and see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It is not just medicines that are administered, the context and the way in which medicines and other interventions are administered also seem to play a significant role in how or in the success of this form of healing. So these are some of the lessons. Of course, there are many other lessons, and I'm sure during the discussion, question and answer, there will be a lot of these things that can be teased out as well. Now, in conclusion, I'm of the view that there is room for meaningful collaboration between traditional healers and Western trained practitioners in mental health promotion in general and mental health promotion in particular. This can only happen if we are all open to a dialogue that may at times take us to unknown knowledge and clinical practice territories. Because that's always the problem with those of us who are trained in terms of Western health practices. So the unknown territories. which may then require us to explore those. And of course, the limitations that may be imposed in terms of our scope of practice by Health Professions Council and the different bodies that regulate our professions. That may also be a problem. But I think we need to sometimes challenge those ceilings and then say, what is it that we can do under these circumstances? I also believe that we need to invest more time and resources in research to understand and implement an informed policy on collaboration between the two healthcare systems. Collaboration between the two systems is perhaps one frontier that may need to be explored in order to bridge the gap between the two systems of healthcare. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tolene Sodi, for that intriguing talk. In fact, this week, as we were also having a similar a seminar on marginalization or exclusion of stakeholders such as traditional health, traditional healers or traditional leaders in healthcare system. I learned that there was even an act that was referred to as a witchcraft suppression act, yes. which in my little knowledge but very ambiguous imagination led me to think that some of the exclusions or the misconceptions that we are suffering today, it's as a result of such acts. And also, as you are mentioning, that the two healthcare systems, and perhaps as much as what I'll call a traditional healthcare system model, having primary, secondary, and tertiary, but yet being treated as one healthcare system, neglected the other practitioners in the healthcare system, which, as you rightfully say, that we need to consider incorporating that into a healthcare system and not have it as two healthcare systems. But nonetheless, yeah, that's just my opinion. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would now welcome to our screens Dr. Tozama Kwebani Oguleye, who is going to talk to us about the role of universities in reclaiming the space of African traditional medicines. Metozama, the floor is yours, or should I say the keyboard? Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Balisa. It is an honor to be invited in this webinar, and I am delighted. I'm just struggling with lightning, with this electricity, but I hope you can see me well on your side. I would like to greet the panelists, the organizing committee, as well as the participants. For me, my role for today is to talk about the role of universities in reclaiming the space of African traditional medicine. But before I get to my presentation, I just want to bring context into it. And that is, there has been a number of consultations that we've been part of. We don't have all the answers. We actually have more questions. We had consultations involved with the traditional health practitioners. When we started, there were about 400 THPs in our database from Sedibeng region. So we started from home. However, we also consulted with the researchers from Value University of Technology. We then moved out, consulted with DSI, Dr. Andile, Dr. Chabalala. We moved on, we consulted with the chairperson of traditional healers in the SADC region. So there were quite a number. I'm not going to mention all of them here, but there were also community participation, whether in terms of radio interviews or in terms of TV interviews. The reason we had the consultations is because when you talk about herbs, we are talking about the South African biodiversity, which is a national priority. So since it's a national priority, therefore there has to be national consultations. At the end of those activities, for me, it was clear. And what I'm gonna quote now, I'm gonna quote what President Clinton said in 1998 when he came to visit us in South Africa in Cape Town. that what we have been asking has been a wrong question. We have been asking, what can we do for Africa? That is a wrong question. The question we should be asking, or we should have been asking, is what can we do with Africa? That is a correct question. So I'm bringing this up because I think the universities have been asking the wrong question. And the question for a long time that we've been asking is, what can we do for traditional healers? Actually, the correct question that we should be asking is, what can we do with traditional healers? And I'm very aware that when you talk about academic excellence, or when you talk about research excellence, we normally talk about it in the context of a discipline or in the framework of a discipline. However, the solutions that we brought for grand challenges always come at the interface of discipline. I've just prepared a short presentation. So I just wanted to bring that context before I share what we have done and what still needs to be done by universities as their role in terms of reclaiming. Because for a long time, another thing that we've been saying is integration of traditional medicine into the South African health system. But now we are talking about reclaiming the space, because that space on its own is a space of its own. So that is my presentation. So when we started, there was a lot that we had to uncover in terms of identity. Because when you talk about also African biodiversity, it can go drug discovery route or complementary medicine. And then we are aware that we belong in the IKS space and our part falls under complementary medicine. Then we had to define the value chain. The value chain, basic science is also very important. It's just that for today, I didn't include in the value chain, but we identify that there's applied research, there's authentication. We corrected that part because when we started, we said validation. But when you talk about traditional medicine, it's so integrated into the culture and no one can validate the culture of the people, but you can authenticate the claims and document what you found. And then we move forward in terms of the value chain to the product development and then to the commercialization. So this is how we look at the value chain, and mainly because we want to embrace STEMI with the 3 I's at the end, which is innovation, infrastructure, and industrialization. Then the vision is more about creating a platform to scientifically authenticate traditional medicine. That is the objective of what we're doing. And that is what we're also encouraging other universities to become part of this consortium. In terms of the work itself, the project is more of the interdisciplinary to transdisciplinary type of research. And we focus on chemical providing, biological screening, safety, reproducibility, and the phytochemical characterization. So when you talk about now mental health, what we've also found, I hope that Elupoto was here, the chairperson, but he's struggling with load shedding. What we have found when it comes to mental health, sometimes people, they will say, after I've taken a formulation from a traditional healer was not well. You find that it's not the herbs that had a problem, but it's the mineral content that had a problem. It's the dosage that is a challenge, because also where you grow these herbs is very important, but also in terms of dosage, in terms of the fingerprinting, that's where the university comes using our infrastructure to find out what is the mineral content, what is the phytochemical screening of that formulation. That is where we come in. So where is the gap? Because universities have been doing some part of research in terms of the natural product. The gap is that we have not been collaborating together. We have not been working together. And the challenges of mental health, the challenges that we're facing are very complex. So it's not going to be a singular unit. We need dynamic thinking. That's the first step. We need this collaborative effort, not just university on their own, but university working with the traditional healers. The second part is that we focus so much on publication. And this came at the expense of institutional recognition of the traditional medicine space. So this is what we are seeking to resolve in terms of not just focusing on the natural product chemistry, but embracing it holistically, but also in terms of not just focusing on publication and education and training, but institutional recognition of African traditional medicine. So the way you can look at it, because when I started, I talked about the consultation. We do work with a number of universities, for example, UKZN. We do work with UKZN. We do work, there's some part of traditional medicine that they are focusing on. We do work with Northwest University. We do work with University of Limpopo. So it's more about now, how can we form this alliance of universities that have some part of work in traditional medicine. For example, in terms of VUT, we're very strong when it comes to phytochemical screening. And we know which of our partners are strong at what. For example, during COVID, we had a project that we didn't have a biosafety level 4 lab, and CSIR assisted us on that. But the whole reason of having this alliance is in terms of sharing the infrastructure. Firstly, having more of a coherent framework that addresses the challenges that are of local relevance. And having this infrastructure that we can share, working with the postgrad, of course, postdoc candidates as well. And strategy objective 4 is more about publication, but not only traditional way of publishing in journals, but also using science for advocacy. So we also publish in magazine, and we also look at other forms of media that we can publish to make sure that there is dissemination of information and there is awareness. As I mentioned before, Tadil Rupert will relate the story, but one of the traditional healers, I think it was in Soweto, who was accused of being a witchcraft. This is so related also to this mental health. And what happened after that, and why was the person accused? How can we then have the road shows to have more awareness on the role that we play, on the role that traditional healers play, become also aware that there is culture. In terms of academia, there's culture. In terms of traditional healers, there's culture. But beyond culture, there's a necessity that we work together. Then also in terms of securing funding, in terms of collaboration, I've also already mentioned, but not only that, how then can we take the outputs and make sure that we commercialize them at the industrialization part of it. So the example I'm sharing now, it's more of 4 pictures that are put together. This is the work that we've been doing at Value University of Technology. The first thing that we did with the traditional healers, we created a short learning program in civil biomedical procedures. And what was at our advantage here, one of our staff members was a traditional healer and a nurse. So it was dual expertise. So Prof. Pingwana worked with Mark Denisi. And then what we're doing, we were training the THPs in civil biomedical procedures. That's the first picture there. They are in a lecture room, how to take high blood pressure, how to urine test and other. Then they do the practical aspect of it. And then at the completion of the course or short learning program, then we also give them the equipment. So the last picture, it's me now, that is Tolo, one of the traditional healers here at the Val. So we had visited his Dumba just to see what he does. Actually here, he checked my blood pressure and he saw that it was high. So he actually prescribed a formulation for me from his Dumba. Then here we had organized together with the traditional healers at Val an international conference, but it was a composition in that conference of the stakeholders. There were researchers, community, traditional healers, DSI was part of it, Northwest. So in terms of diversity that was there, and also it was more of a hallmark and a foundation or a gateway for future engagements. This is a process for, I don't want to be too technical, but when the formulations come in, remember when they come in as water extract. So from there, we have to dry them, whether it's freeze dried into powder. And then from there, if it's coming as a plant, as a herb itself, there's a drying also. Then we move the type of sample fingerprinting to chemical profiling, to in vitro. If we do have the machines, if we don't, we look for the stakeholders or that we work with. I think they can assist on that. The potency testing, and then the formulation and testing. So all of this, it's more about documentation. We're not validating the claims because this work has been so engrafted. We've been using it in our communities for years. It's just a matter of documenting the findings. One of the work that we also did together with Northwest University and DSI, Dr. Andile, was to write in terms of advocacy, what South Africa is doing to protect and share traditional medicine. That is one of the papers that was published in the conversation. So advocacy, we also wrote a paper, Impact of Evidence-Based Science Advice to Government. This paper was actually submitted to INGSA, and it's also available in the International Science Council. But the whole aim was, how can we work together with traditional healers, not for, but with traditional healers that's also using publication as a form of advocacy for what I've shared. This is one of our showcasing here. We were showcasing, because we have a number of prototypes. As I said before, when these have come as help. So there's also some trial and error in terms of how can we translate them to prototypes, or how can we translate them into products that can be packaged. So we have about 10 prototypes varying from cough syrup and others. So here we're just showcasing what we have done as the university, and that is ASSAf Benisi. She was working with us, but she has now retired. That's the lady I was talking about, who has keyword expertise. In terms of who we work with, it's not everyone that is here. The project has been funded by IDC and VUT. So we collaborate with Northwest, I've already said, with DSI, Dr. Andile and Dr. Chabalala there. With DOH, we also work with Mr. Mbezi there. With CSIR, we work there, UKZ and Prof. Kaleni. In Limpopo, we do collaborate. NRF, we have some funding that we've received from NRF. And VETS, we do collaborate with Bavesh, Prof. Bavesh, Center for Tuberculosis, because we don't have a facility for tuberculosis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tozama, for that presentation. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go to the Q&A, but perhaps I need to just first go to the Q&A boxes on our online platform. The panelists, have you had time to probably look at the questions that have been posted in the Q&A? And if you have, just let me know so that I can allow you to pick and address them, because there's quite a number of them, and then I can open up for the verbal Q&A. There is a question for you, Dr. Dikobe, on how can one deal with resistance of Western practitioners and not wanting or being eager to work with traditional or faith healers, or vice versa. And then the next question is, what are the key differences and functions between traditional leaders and traditional healers? And then from Roxanne, so please do note them, fellow panelists. From Roxanne, we could see the need for mutual understanding and respect for each other's roles, a role between Western and traditional healers in our work with people living with dementia under the STRIDE project, especially to support referral, care and support pathways, and to combat stigma. My question to any of you speakers is about how you think we can bridge these often juxtaposed worlds to support care and support services for mental health services under that culturally services, mental health service users that are culturally acceptable. Any thoughts on how current primary healthcare responses can be strengthened by including these local sources of support, especially considering that traditional healers are often people's first port of call for help? I think I will just leave it at those for now, and then we move on to the next set of questions. And
Hi, should I respond to my question? So I can't speak for all Western medical practitioners. I can, however, speak for my speciality as a psychiatrist. So I belong to a group called ASSAf, which is the South African Society of Psychiatrists. And within ASSAf, we've got smaller subgroups of interest. And one of the smaller subgroups that we've got is the spirituality subgroup, where we have a number of us psychiatrists who are very open-minded when coming to the fact that there are alternative modalities of healing. There are faith healers, there are traditional healers, there are spiritual healers. So in our society as psychiatrists, we do have a lot of workshops that we have where we do talk and we do give presentations to the greater body of ASSAf. And for those colleagues who do not believe in the collaboration between Western psychiatrists and traditional or faith healers, they are then able to refer to those who are more comfortable. So the aim is not to convert everyone. The aim is for those for everyone to understand what their limitations are and know that where they are limited, there are those who are able to delve into a different realm and then be able to appropriately refer. So I hope that answers the question. And then the second one of what is the difference between a traditional healer and a traditional leader? The difference is in the latter word. Healer is somebody who is trained to diagnose and to prescribe, to heal a condition. And then a leader is a person who is then elected or born into a position of leadership. So I don't think the two are synonymous at all. And I'll just give an example when coming to Western side, where you ask what is the difference between a doctor and a hospital CEO. A hospital CEO is a leader and a manager of the hospital, and then a doctor is the one that does the diagnosing and the treating of the illness. So I hope this answers the question.
Well, can I come in, Dr. Skajan?
Please go ahead, thanks.
Yes, I want to address the question, I think, that is raised, the comment and the question raised by Roxanne. And incidentally, Roxanne, who worked together on the STRIDE project. Hi, Roxanne. You see, the issues around whether or not we can bridge the two worlds is always going to be a complex and sometimes an emotional debate. Because firstly, we are dealing with power dynamics here. I think that's essentially at the center of all this. Where an impression has actually been created that Western forms of healing, Western traditions are always superior when compared to others. This is now the political stuff around this. And consequently, there's always been this agenda to try and portray Western forms of knowledge, Western forms of healing as superior when compared to others. And the very same kind of historical reality somehow continues to perpetuate this notion that traditional health practices are dangerous, they are retarded, they are uncivilized, and so on. So a whole lot of these things continue in the background. But of course, what these people who would say that often ignore the fact that, any form of healing, talking about medicines or any other form of healing, whether that is practiced in the West or in Africa or anywhere else in the world, there is a potential that these healing methods can be dangerous, depending on how you apply them. But now, here is a very sad reality about this situation, where you find many people, and of course, we've already talked about more than 70% of people probably consulting with traditional health practitioners at some point in their lives. Now, what I find very interesting is the people who consult those traditional healers or whatever groups of alternative healthcare providers, if they go there to consult, for instance, a traditional healer, and they get better there, for argument's sake, this person has got some psychological challenges and they go and consult a traditional healer. If they get better, they're not going to go to the hospital and say, look, we are now better, and therefore it means the traditional healthcare system is working. They continue with their lives because primarily what they want is to feel better. Now, what often happens is there will be a few cases, of course, that may not be successful right there when these people consult with traditional health practitioners. And these cases, in some instances, would go to Western trained practitioners, maybe already in, should I say, in a bad state. Now, on the basis of those few cases, it is always tempting for us who are trained in Western health practice to then say, yes, this is evidence to show that traditional health practitioners are dangerous, their systems are not working, and so on and so on. But ignoring the fact that there are probably millions of people who are going there who will not see any need to come to the hospital to say, we now feel better because we've consulted traditional healers. So I think the issues around power dynamics is a very fundamental one. And in fact, for us to move in this country and probably elsewhere in the continent of Africa, for us to move, we really need to go to the level of changing, working on the mindsets of our political leadership as well, so that we begin to have them to realize that we are talking about knowledge systems and healing systems. And therefore, each system has got its role to play, and potentially, if the two systems could be treated as equals and supported accordingly, you're probably going to find that there would be merit in what happens in traditional health practice. A very good example would be what happens in the field of transport. Just a very wild example that one can give there. We know in this country, for instance, buses are subsidized, trains are subsidized, and so on. But you have the taxi industry, which carries many people, and it is not subsidized. And more often, what you hear about taxis is there is war there. Instead of government going out there to support this system so that it can also be enabled and be on the same level, probably, with the other established systems. So I think this is at the center of this, the whole thing about power dynamics, which has continued to bedevil our healthcare system. Until such time we address that thing, we're going to have problems. And obviously what we need to do is to accept that there are two epistemological foundations. That is the one that governs traditional healing, the one that governs Western health practice. And in view of the fact that these two epistemological systems may not be the same, it is up to us as people who care about the health of the people in the country to come forward and say, how can we then make sure that the two systems that are obviously premised on different foundations, how can we ensure that they all work collaboratively instead of the two of them competing? So I think that is something that I just thought I should raise, because often you find these subtle power dynamics are concealed when we talk about the two systems having to collaborate. And it's always easy to say, but the other guys are very dangerous. The other guys' systems are attacked, and so on and so on. Simply because the power dynamics that are at play continue to bedevil that debate. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Sodi. The fellow panelists, I'm going to encourage you to respond to the questions in the Q&A. Could you please just confirm that they're able to respond to those questions in the Q&A, because I would like to open up for those who would want to ask questions on the platform. Are you able to raise your hands? Emmanuel, I've noted you. Any other hand after Emmanuel? You are welcome to put on your video if ESCOM does allow you. You may go for it.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Your hand that we're able.
Clearly?
I can hear you, Emmanuel. Thank you.
Okay, so good day, everyone. My name is Dr. Emmanuel. I really can you hear me clearly, please?
I can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dr. Emmanuel, and I really appreciate this webinar, especially in our recent generation. My take on this issue of power regarding acceptability of traditional medicine in Africa at large is, firstly, we need to institutionalize. I did my PhD degree in China, and I understand how tradition works. For example, in every province in China, there is a specialized institution, so to say, a university. You will see Shandong Traditional University of Traditional Medicine. So for us to move our platform or our aim for it to be accepted, for it to make sense to everyone, just like the conventional medicine, just like the conventional practices, we need to first of all ensure that there is, and we need to hijack the system from the normal people who just go about learning the skills in three months.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dr. Emmanuel. Do we have any other hand, or do you panelists want to respond to Dr. Emmanuel and those who have posed questions in the Q&A box?
Yes. Can I comment, Dr. Palisa?
Please go
on what Dr. Ayeni has said. I fully agree with what he has said. There's a necessity. I think also in my presentation, I had mentioned that that is what one of the shortcomings of the shortfalls. We have not institutionalized, African traditional medicine. There is a necessity, but also there is another necessity. I see the power, definitely that is a great challenge, but also if we look at STEMI as a channel, to respond to the local context. So it also sits on our shoulders as researchers, as scientists. But having said that, there are a number of great strides that, for example, the Department of Health last year formed a platform and appointed a number of researchers, a number of community members. I'm part of that working group where we are focusing on advising and working on traditional medicine, but it's a platform that was appointed by the Minister of Health. So there are great strides like that, but on what was said by Dr. Ayeni, I fully agree there's a great need for institutionalization of traditional medicine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I also just want to note the comment from Nasima Vauda that the NHI does not say much about the role of the role that the traditional healers will play. Can any of the speakers speak to that? I think there was something with regards to the traditional African medicines, but perhaps not the traditional healers. in the NHI. So if you could address that, I think it will be quite important because NHI does, it's one of those instruments, as much as we are talking about institutionalization, if we are able to channel the discussion to that direction, NHI will be that important tool or instrument that will institutionalize the consideration of incorporating the traditional healers into the system. So colleagues, do you want to respond to those comments?
Well, if I could just give a quick response to that. Again, issues of power dynamics. That's fundamentally at the center of it. I mean, I've attended some of those debates around the national health insurance, the role of this grouping or that grouping, and even when it comes to Western trained health practitioners, you can see that the whole thing about power dynamics, who's going to get a piece of the pie and who's not going to get it, is at the center of this. And now if you have those who are trained in Western health practice, some of them being sidelined in this debate about who's going to eat the cake and who's not going to eat it, you can then imagine what happens to some who are even way back in the queue, who in some cases are actually been ignored deliberately. So the whole thing about traditional healing in NIH has not really come up clearly there. So we find it is just something that is mentioned in passing. And so I think these are some of the key issues that we need to address. And obviously, in my view, there is a need for political will to address some of these fundamental inconsistencies and contradictions in our healthcare system. The moment we do that, we will then be able to deal with some of these things. And maybe just to quickly move on, if you can allow me, to address, I think, one question that has been raised by, trying to find who's raised this. I think it's Stella. Yes, Stella Mugitimi. Where she's trying to ask what's the difference between a traditional healer and a witch doctor. If you can allow me, I can indulge in that for a while, because that's one of the issues.
We have 15 minutes, so perhaps if you could do it in just 2 minutes so that we can have other panelists responding to issues or other questions. I think the Q&A is quite vibrant. There's a long list. Thank you, Prof. You may go for it.
Yes, and I'm going to try and answer this again, going back to what I've said. In my language, we have engaka and we have emuloi. Engaka broadly meaning a traditional healer, for lack of a better word, and a witch meaning muloi, somebody who bewitches. These are two different categories of people. A witch is something else, and a traditional healer, probably what we call a doctor, is something else. And so often what has happened in the past is to sometimes, through what I've already referred to deliberately conflate the two, so that you then have a situation where a traditional healer is all of a sudden seen as a witch doctor, sort of a doctor who's also a witch. That's a different story altogether. So we're talking about traditional healers on the one hand, and we have witches. And as far as I know, in history of the world, you always have witches everywhere else in the world. And so witches in South Africa or in Africa would not be an exception, because even if you go back in historic times, there's been stories around witches and so on. But there's always been stories around traditional healers and traditional healing. So we should always try to make a distinction so that traditional healers are seen differently from what you have as witches. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Any comments to or response to other questions? Lerato Tozama. Okay, so I'm asking colleagues, if you have questions, please do raise your hand. We still have a couple of minutes before we could do the closure. I think I want us to engage as much as possible. Do you have any hands? I'm not seeing any. Gonna go to the Q&A and see if there are. So Peter Aka says one of the major problems with TM, which I think it's traditional medicines, is apparently lack of standardization. What are the universities doing to improve standardization of traditional medicines? And I'll also go to Mahlodi Zondo's question. What support is given to traditional healers dealing with children and adolescent age? And then I will go to another question by Nolwazi. The traditional medicines I take, formulation are normally used a lot, and the THPs, I'm not sure what THPs is, but I'm certain that somebody will clarify it for all of us, are prescribing, traditional health practitioners are prescribing to their clients. Some have been used for years. So why are we using the Western scientific model to test and evaluate them? Also, the Western ways of evaluating like clinical trials are expensive. So what can we do to formulate a way of evaluating and certifying the formulation's efficiency that is favorable to us? And I also wonder if some of the traditional healthcare practitioners would feel that as there is such a standardization approach towards traditional medicines or traditional health practices. Dr. Boni Lejekpama, I'm going to ask you to raise your questions. I'm hoping that colleagues in the panel, you have noted some of the questions we have posed to you. Kindly go for it in just a matter of a minute, Dr. Bonile.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palesa. I just want to check, is the Department of Health the right department for traditional healers? I would personally think that it's not the right department, because traditional healing is much more than, medicine. It deals with a lot of issues that are not necessarily of a medical nature. That is why even currently the Department of Health, whenever there are issues raised that relate to traditional healing, you find that they are found wanting because they don't understand. So if someone can just answer me, is that the correct department? And lastly, is our government for traditional healing, or is it still practicing the Suppression of Witchcraft Act, although it has been repealed? Because the way their attitude is towards traditional healing is as if it's the old government of apartheid. Thank you.
Dr. Palisa, can we go ahead and respond now, or?
The interest of time, yes. Thank you.
Okay, I have noted the question. I will start with the standardization. In South Africa, in terms of standards, the standards are coming from ASSAf. And universities will work with ASSAf. So we're part of a technical team that comes up with standards. So there has been a standard, I'm aware, that has been approved for traditional medicine. I'm not sure whether it was 2019 or 2017, but I can double check the dates. However, also from the community, through the engagement, they were not happy with the standards coming from ASSAf because of the ASSAf has been regulating also, not regulating, have been coming up with standards for pharmaceutical and so a number of people were not happy. But I think at this point in the value chain, we all have to identify what role can we play. That being said, on standards, in terms of regulation, the regulatory authority for traditional medicine is SAHPRA. And in SAHPRA, it's not regulated as your pharmaceutical type of medicine. So traditional medicine in the SAHPRA document is category D. So in the presentation, when I put the 4 things or 5 things that we look at, which one of them is potency, toxicity, efficacy, reproducibility. Those are what documents, what informed us is the SAHPRA document, what they are looking for. However, I'm very aware also there has been discussion if that's the right platform to actually now regulate. So standards is ASSAf, regulation SAPRA. Then coming to the third question by Dr. Bonile. Thank you, Doc, for that question. With the DOH, I wouldn't say it's a right or it's not a correct platform, but I will say maybe what we can also have to identify is what role will DOH as a National Department of Health have in the value chain. Because also, as I mentioned in the beginning, when we work with traditional health practitioners, our focus is more on the HEP as the university at the moment. We are not, in terms of the culture, in terms of the spiritual aspect of it, that is not our territory. In terms of the expertise that we have the infrastructure, we have the expertise that can authenticate. Because if we're going to industrialize and export and import, there will be some level of documentation that is going to be required. How do we go about with that? But not to play the role of traditional healers. That is not our role. So it's a matter of collaboration. Collaboration also, we have to identify who's playing which role. With the National Department of Health, who are working with Mr. Mbetsi, I'm not sure how they select, but I'm very aware that in the committee, there are traditional healers that are present. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further responses, okay. Going once, going twice. Dr. Kalani, all right. Pardon me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being such an engaging audience, participants. I'm hoping that the questions that have not been answered live during this session, the panelists will note them, and I am certain that ASSAf also will take them up and find means and pathways to respond to those questions. From my side, I think my job is done. I would like to find out from Dr. Palani Lehwale if there is any other announcement or closure or messages that anybody should do. But from myself, I would like to thank you, the panelists, and also to the participants. On behalf of the panelists, I would also like to convey my sincere gratitude for staying tuned, treating this topic as very important to you, to understanding for the sake of our communities, those immediate and those within our professions. So I do think that the more of these questions, cases that we create, that we bring up, the more that we will find a space to ensure that they just don't become by the wayside conversations. They do find a fertile soil where they can be incorporated into policy, where they can incorporate all the voices and relevant stakeholders of importance to ensuring that there is an appropriate human-centric approach to ensuring that traditional health practitioners, traditional medicines, faith-based healers and alike do feel part of the healthcare system.